Some people out there contend that if you're a night owl, that's just going to be impossible or very, very challenging to do. Turns out it's not impossible, and it's not even that challenging to do, provided you do the right things. Just a brief overview of the study, and then I'll give you the key takeaways. It was a randomized controlled trial. It involved a number of different people, both male and female. And what they did was they used non-pharmacological, practical interventions in a real-world setting. Here I'm paraphrasing. They used targeted light exposure. They used consistent sleep-wake times. They used fixed meal times, caffeine intake, and exercise. And this is one of the reasons I love this study so much, because I've done episodes where I've talked about temperature, exercise, feeding, and most importantly, light exposure as a way to control and shift your sleep-wake cycles, your so-called circadian timing and entrainment. What did they find? Well, they found, quote, significant improvements in terms of mood, so far less depression and stress, subjectively measured, as well as improved cognitive performance that was objectively measured, so improved reaction times, improved physical grip strength, which is actually a measure not just of strength per se, but also of nervous system function, and a number of things that people could do in order to optimize their morning hours, even though they were night owls previously. What did they have people do? Well, I'm just going to list this off in sort of rapid fire succession. Then we'll provide a link to the study if you want to learn more. First of all, they told participants to try and wake up 2 to 3 hours before their typical wake up time. 2 to 3 hours. That seems brutal to me, and probably seems brutal to you if you're somebody who typically wakes up at 10 a.m. to try and get up at 8 or even 7 a.m. consistently. But they were also asked to maximize outdoor light exposure during the mornings for reasons that if you've listened to this podcast before, if you've heard me talk about before, you know that I'm constantly talking about. I'll probably go into the grave shouting, please get as much light exposure from sunlight early in the day as possible, because it sets in motion a huge number of things that are beneficial for your mental health and physical health, including dopamine production, timing melatonin production correctly, reducing cortisol peaks late in the day, et cetera, et cetera. So they asked them to get a lot of outdoor light exposure. They didn't give them a specific amount, but they said maximize outdoor light exposure during the mornings, the time before noon. And again, they had them waking up 2 to 3 hours before their habitual wake up time. Your schedule earlier to try and keep sleep wake times fixed between their work days and their weekends. So not sleeping in on the weekends or not having any sleep in days, regardless of how well they slept the night before. How fixed? Within 15 to 30 minutes of their pre-designated time. So if they were waking up at 7 o'clock one day, they set their alarm and they made sure they got out of bed at 7 o'clock every day, plus or minus 30 minutes, but never later than 7:30, never earlier than 6:30. Participants were also asked to try and go to sleep 2 to 3 hours before their habitual bedtime. So again, these are people that want to stay up late, like 11 p.m. perhaps, but even as late as 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. And now they are asked to go to sleep 2 to 3 hours before their habitual bedtime and to wake up 2 to 3 hours earlier, as I mentioned earlier. They were also told, and I love this because it fits with many of the things we've talked about on this podcast before, to try and limit light exposure during the evenings. Dim the lights or limit altogether artificial lights. A lot of reasons for that. I covered that in the Master Sleep episode. I covered that in the Optimize Health Using Light episode. You can find